For 63 years, Venezuela accepted the 1899 Arbitral Award, which clearly defined the boundary between Venezuela and what was then British Guyana. But in 1962, Venezuela suddenly declared the award null and void, a claim formally rejected by Guyana. Following decades of provocation and challenges to its sovereignty and territorial integrity, Guyana turned to the International Court of Justice in 2018, seeking a reaffirmation of the award's validity. Yet, even with the case before the ICJ and several orders to refrain from a planned election to elect a governor for Guyana's Essequibo, Venezuela's acts of aggression have only intensified. Tonight on Sources, we speak with Dr. Mark Kirton, former Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Guyana, about the historical roots, the geopolitical implications, and what lies ahead in this long-standing controversy. Good evening and welcome to Sources. I'm your host, Svetlana Marshall. Tonight, we'll be talking about the controversy between Guyana and Venezuela and presenting you with the facts regarding that territorial controversy that started in 1962, just before Guyana gained its independence. To do so with me, I have Dr. Mark Kirton. Dr. Mark Kirton is the former Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Guyana. Dr. Kirton, thank you so much for sitting with me this evening.
Thank you very much for your kind invitation. It's always a pleasure.
Dr. Kirton, tomorrow Guyana will celebrate its 59th independence anniversary. And more than 63 years, or just about 63 years ago, Venezuela laid claim to 2/3 of our territory, although there was the 1899 Arbitral Award that outlined the boundaries between then British Guyana and Venezuela. It is important for us to discuss, one, the origin of Venezuela's claim. So I want to take you back to the 1899 Arbitral Award. What are the facts regarding that award?
Well, I think we have to go into the 1800s, back to the 1800s, in which there was significant disagreement between Venezuela and Great Britain, which still was responsible for Guyana as a colony. And by 1897, after a series of disagreements, there was the Treaty of Washington, which perhaps was influenced by the United States at the time. And the Treaty of Washington in 1897 established an arbitral team of arbitrators, who met in that 2-year period between 1897 and 1899, when a full, final, and perfect arbitral award was, after adjudication, presented to both parties. And there was agreement. One could say here that in relation to the composition of the team of arbitrators, there was membership from Russia, from Great Britain, the US, quite a formidable team of arbitrators. And that award was the 1899 Arbitral Award. Now after that, there was a mixed commission with Britain and Venezuela. And in 1905, there was this settlement where all agreed. So we have here the 1899 award. The 1905, you had the survey done of the area, markers placed, and in 1905, both agreed. And that went on for more than 5 decades. Now, in the interim, in 1931, the team from Venezuela, Britain, and Brazil met to look at the borders between Brazil, or among Brazil, Guyana, and Venezuela. And at that point, all agreed to what they called a trijunction point, where the 3 borders met. And that was very clear. There was no form of disagreement. One could see here that ever since then, Brazil has continued consistently to talk about the inviolability, the sanctity of borders that have been settled by juridical award. And we see here both parties, Venezuela and then British Guyana, continuing to look at the borders without any disagreement. Looking at their jurisdictions, they both were, in a sense, responsible for maintaining that boundary, and it was there. However, in 1962, remember 1962, Guyana was on the cusp of its independence. There was this arbitrary argument from Venezuela, which was taken to the United Nations, that the 1899 Arbitral Award was null and void because I think they suggested that there was collusion between some judges, which made the agreement null and void.
So for more than 60 years, they accepted the award, and then they came up with this argument that there was collusion.
Yes, but you know, the argument was based on a posthumous letter, a memorandum, by a young member of their group, of the team of lawyers that represent Venezuela, Svetlana Marshall, who posthumously, in a letter, indicated that this was the case, that there was this collusion. And because of that, the Venezuelans moved that on to the United Nations. Now, between 1962 and 1966, there was a group of experts who looked at this spurious claim, which was taken to the United Nations, and they found no evidence at all of collusion. Still not agreeing, or still full of disagreements. At the time of independence in 1966, British Guyana, Great Britain, and Venezuela met in Geneva and signed the Geneva Agreement. Now, under that agreement, this team was given 4 years to come up with some solutions to the settlement of this controversy. And one could note here that during that period, very early in Guyana's independence, 1966, there was the Ankoko Island, Guyana's half of the Ankoko Island, which was given under the 1899 award to Guyana, to British Guyana at the time. That was taken by Venezuela. And so they control, up to today, the entire Ankoko Island. Now, I think that that type of aggression might have had some impact on the lack of success for these 4 years of that group, that mixed commission that was looking at the 1966 Geneva Agreement. Now, and so when both parties saw that there could be no success in some form of confirmation of the settlement, they had to use, both agreed to go to the next stage. That was the United Nations Secretary Generals, under which the 1966 Geneva Agreement gave the Secretary General to choose a course of action, which could then lead to some form of, resolution. Now, one could remember here that at the same time, in 1970, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, was able to broker what he termed the Protocol of Port of Spain. Now, it was termed the Protocol of Port of Spain, which was to put in cold storage, one could argue, for 12 years, this agreement, while some form of modus operandi, some form of maybe a rapprochement, a kind of movement towards some form of de-escalating the tensions that arose at the time, could take place. That was 1970. So between 1970 and 1982, there were also, acts of aggression. There was times when, for example, the Venezuelans used their influence in the international financial institutions to block some loans for Guyana, one of them significantly being the hydroelectric program which was being under that administration, under the PNC administration at the time, being followed. So, at the same time, President Leone of Venezuela also made some decrees. So you found that in that period there were also acts of aggression. So in 1982, that ended, and with Venezuela saying that they're not going to renew it. And so another approach was made, this time to the United Nations. Now, between 1990 and 2017,
they had a good officers
process, and maybe we can discuss that too.
Yeah, so tell me about that process, what it entails, and that stretched from like you said, 1990 to 2017, and that's before we said enough talking.
Right.
What that was meant to achieve and what it entailed.
Well, the good officer process, the good office is the good office of the Secretary General of the UN, and a personal representative of the Secretary General was appointed, and there were, I think, 4 of them. The last one being Professor Norman Gervin of the University of West Indies. And in that period, they were supposed to, and in some ways they did, go to both sides seeking some form of solution. That did not work. And although, Guyana, never the aggressor, was part of that process until 2017. So here we see consistent efforts at the resolution of this claim. And by 2017, there was the view that there could be no resolution at this stage, and that Guyana opted to ask for a judicial approach.
Yeah. How important was that for us to request the UN Secretary General to have the matter, in a sense, referred to the International Court of Justice?
Well, there were several efforts at resolution over the years, dialogue, but we saw getting nowhere. As a matter of fact, in that period, there were several acts of aggression by Venezuela. We saw a seismic ship being seized by Venezuela. We saw even some decrees by President Maduro, in a sense, annexing the maritime space, not only of Guyana. There were some decrees, one of them 1787 and Decree 1859, talked about the space being Venezuelans. And so I think that after all of those efforts, Guyana used that part of the agreement to approach the Secretary General of the UN to use that authority which was vested in him under the 1966 Geneva Agreement. And that initiated a process which is still before the court for adjudication.
Okay, so the matter went to the court. Guyana filed its application in 2018, just after it was referred to by the UN Secretary General. What the case entails, what has happened since then. We'll talk about the acts of aggression, because Venezuela has said that it does not recognize the jurisdiction of the court, although the court has ruled that it has jurisdiction to determine the validity of the 1899 Arbitral Award. And we've asked the court, Guyana, to uphold that award. But walk me through the case thus far and the arguments put forward by Guyana.
Well, I think generally one must say to the public that the only thing that we're talking about is the validity of the 1899 Arbitral Award. There's nothing to do with maritime space or water or anything about that. It's basically looking at the issue of the validity of the claim and the view from Guyana, and the position of Guyana, that the 1899 Arbitral Award was a full, final, and perfect settlement of the border issue. They went to the court, and while Venezuela argued on 2 occasions that there was no jurisdiction by the ICJ, the ICJ clearly indicated that it has jurisdiction over that for adjudication of that issue. But we see an on and off kind of presence and participation in the case. As a matter of fact, quite recently, Venezuela appeared, and now they have until August 11, 2025, to provide a counter memorial for Guyana's final memorial that was presented in December of 2024. So we see where the issue is a justifiable one from the Guyana point of view, that the 1899 award was perfect and final. And so, but in the meantime, Venezuela at sometimes was appearing before the court, at other times they argued there's no jurisdiction. So we see a kind of a flip-flopping, to my mind.
Do you think that's intended to further delay the case?
Well,
given the fact that the court might say, well, they have the right to respond.
yes, it could be seen, as, to my mind, as an effort to delay. But I think Guyana continues to be consistent in its view that there's a justifiable position that it maintains, and that it will not waver. It will always be part of those proceedings, until final adjudication.
Now, in the interim, even as the substantive case is still before the court and the submissions are being made, Guyana asked for some orders to be issued. One, because Venezuela in 2023, had a referendum, and the court ordered it to refrain from any act that would infringe on Guyana's territorial sovereignty and integrity. And then again, a recent order as May 2025. Tell me about the importance of those orders, why it was important for the court to issue those orders, and also Venezuela saying they rejected the orders of the court and they went ahead with a referendum. And then we'll talk a bit about the Argyle Agreement and so forth.
Well, I think that those were provisional measures,
yes,
which were ordered by the ICJ, International Court of Justice, which clearly indicated that it was a violation of international law for Venezuela to go ahead with, first of all, the referendum, which they went ahead with, and most recently with this issue of an election. Now, I think it is interesting to observe that in both cases, Venezuela denied or did not follow the instructions of the International Court of Justice, and undoubtedly violated the norms and principles of international law. So here we have continued aggression by Venezuela across the years, not adhering to the judgments or to the measures being given by the ICJ. And we see acts of provocation continuing. First of all, the referendum, and then now, today, an election which one might suggest symbolic, but could have some impact on our territorial integrity and sovereignty.
What are the consequences for Venezuela, given the fact that it has consistently rejected the measures issued by the court, the orders of the court?
Well, I think that you see a level of continuing isolation of Venezuela in some ways, and also the desire or the move by Venezuela to President Maduro, to my mind, to attempt to ensure that his people, or there's a level of nationalism which he can bring back, given the existential, well, the crises, both economic and social, which exist in Venezuela. So you have a country in crisis. He's trying to put the people back, into the nationalistic mode, and therefore those acts of provocation continue. But I also think that we need to look at what are some of the potential impact on the international community, because we see where Venezuela has gone on a propaganda offensive And I believe that as Guyana, we need also to continue to sensitize not only local communities, but our international allies, and where alliances don't exist, even among the friends of Venezuela, to develop those alliances by presenting the correctness of our position in relation to the controversy.
Okay, and you're part of a group of experts who are traveling not just within the borders of Guyana, but beyond, going to various countries as well. Recently, you went to Brazil. Tell me about the organization and the mandate with regards to dealing with this territorial controversy and claims to two-thirds of Guyana.
Well, ours is called the Center for International and Border Studies. It's a think tank which was started a year ago and which basically has us as one of its major planks on the platform of dealing with international issues, the evidence-based research on issues such as borders, such as the issue of small states in the international system, and contemporary, regional, and international issues which tend to have implications for the Caribbean and Latin America. This organization, this grouping, is made up of people from Latin America and the Caribbean, the United States, Asia, and Africa. And we started, when we saw that there was a gap, because we had the first seminar in Georgetown on borders generally, contested borders hemispherically and globally. And one of the issues coming out of that Georgetown meeting was the view that there ought to be greater sensitization of the people, and both domestically and internationally, and that we initiated a program in an effort to contribute to sensitization and education, and to bring a clear understanding of the issues in Guyana and elsewhere. Now, we were invited to Trinidad, and I was there along with the advisor on borders, Mr. Greenidge. We had contributions from professors from Brazil, Professor Paulo Correa from Brazil. We had the former ambassador Insanali of Guyana to the US. We've had former ambassador of Venezuela, Ambassador Miles, Cheryl Miles, who's now retired. And we had, at one of the seminars, we had Admiral Best, who used to be the Chief of Staff of the Guyana Defense Force. So we had a very broad grouping with different perspectives shared. And we also had, just recently, yesterday, we had a seminar at the Federal University of Roraima in Boa Vista, Brazil. Very interesting in that I think the shared perspectives indicated that Brazil, as one of the significant counterweights or to any kind of Venezuelan aggression, there must be more robust kind of interaction between Guyana and that country to ensure it continues to support, unequivocally, the position of Guyana. So we were able to have meetings with students, with faculty, with members of the public in Brazil, and I think they now have a better understanding from the perspective of Guyana on our position.
No, I saw recently talks or diplomats, in fact, and regular persons suggesting why not return to a format similar to the good officers process where you could have friendly, and in fact, Venezuela has been calling on Guyana to return to the table to discuss. Why is it important for Guyana to maintain its course at the ICJ and not return to a situation where there are talks?
Now, we've had, as you mentioned, years, decades of attempts at dialogue, discourse, and at the end of the day, we saw an absence of success. And I think that it is important that Venezuela recognizes that the only place that they should advance their case or claim is at the UN. And we have consistently said that the time for that kind of dialogue has passed, and now it is at the level of the ICJ. It should be left there for final and full settlement and adjudication. So that I don't see at this stage the need for any dialogue in relation to that claim, because there's been a long, period of that. I think that good neighborliness is an important component, undoubtedly. But I don't think we can speak now at this stage in relation to any kind of negotiating that border issue. We have had a consistent approach by Guyana. We've gone through years, as I mentioned. We've seen acts of provocation by Venezuela. We've noted where in February there was
an incursion.
There was six military servicemen shot by armed Venezuelans. We've seen where there's a brazen approach by a Venezuelan naval vessel into Guyana's exclusive economic zone, close to the drill ships that are actively engaged in production of oil. We've seen where the kind of movement to have an election in a region that is never part of Venezuela, nor its colonial ruler Spain. But we see that all those are significant acts, to my mind, that undermine any kind of process, and therefore the place for it, the only place that claim should be made, continue to be made by Venezuela, is at the International Court of Justice, which basically will have to ensure a final settlement of the issue.
Do you think that is as a result of the claims by Venezuela and the actions, the incursions, the attacks on our military men? Recently we saw that on men dressed in civilian clothing also attacked our military men in the Kirton River, 3 attacks within 24 hours. Is this fueling such attacks, and are you concerned that should we deviate from the process of the ICJ, we could see more attacks coming our way?
Well, those continue to be acts of provocation. I believe that Guyana ought to continue to use diplomacy as its first line of defense. Yeah. However, I own also the view that we must, in a sense, upgrade consistently our military assets to be able to defend, in the first place, our integrity and sovereignty. And while we see those acts as potentially increasing tensions among the two states, I think Guyanese must be consistent and must be consistently updated on Guyana's positions, so that there's no conjecture, no misconception. And we must deal with the information deficits, which I think are still there in relation to ensuring that our countrymen and people of the region and the world are updated.
You've spoken about the information deficit. You've spoken about your part, the organization, the center going from country to country, region to region in Guyana to talk about this controversy. What's your take? What would be your advice to government? How could they improve? I know that in the lead up to the referendum in 2023, we saw, widespread public awareness. Is there need for it to be more aggressive, and should an aggressive awareness program be seen as Guyana in panic?
No, I would say that there ought to be this consistently updating of the Guyanese people. But then there's some other areas which I would like to suggest. In the first place, I think there should be public education. That the issue of borders should be added to the curriculum in schools and in university. You know, in Venezuela, from nursery to university, there's that particular argument about the rightness of their claim to Guyana. And I don't think we have consistently had that kind of educational process unfolding in Guyana. So in the first place, I think there should be education, both at primary and secondary and even university levels.
Yeah.
In other words, in addition to the curriculum across the country and across the system, I also believe that there ought to be development, the establishment of a unit, maybe among state agencies and others, to have a day-to-day analysis of border issues. Remember in the 1960s, when Guyana attained its independence, there were 3 areas of what my term territorial conflicts or claims. There was Suriname, which is still there. There was Venezuela, which was there in 1966. And in the 1960s, there was an attempt at secession by Venezuelans in Rupununi. So those, at that time, we moved to ensure that there was this consistent updating of the Guyanese people and the international community of those issues, which I think tended to de-escalate some of the challenges we had and tensions. Now here we have in 2025, and I think thereafter, because, you know, I'm sure, or I'm confident that the ICJ will rule in favor of Guyana, but the issue of compliance will come up after that, because Venezuela doesn't seem to be, well, they already indicated that it has no jurisdiction. So the issue of compliance will come up. And my view is that what we need to have is that sustained interaction with the local community and also with our international allies and potential allies. And I believe that one recommendation could be that they should have a core of special envoys established, not necessarily only from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but from other places, that could go to capitals with a mandate to present the Guyana's position, not only on the short-term issue of elections and so on, by Venezuela in a territory that's never claimed, owned or occupied by them, but also in the positions down the road, where we have to ensure that whatever is the outcome, and I think the outcome will be in Guyana's favor, that the issue of compliance is understood. So here we have that, and I also believe that domestically we can have as a program a kind of a hinterland development engagement program where Guyanese could be encouraged and maybe even given incentives to move to those areas which are close to the borders and engage in productive activity. At the same time, ensuring that that's the first line of understanding of what the issues are at the borders. So we have that. I say a multifaceted kind of approach: education, not and sensitization of the international community, a program for occupation of that area, of those areas, borders especially, with some incentives, a program for agro-industrial development and for mining, etc. Prudent management of the environment and all of that, as ways of ensuring that we all engage. And at the same time, I believe there must be a national approach. All the parties. This cannot be, government only. I would call it a whole of country engagement, where you have all of the stakeholders actively sitting and assessing regularly what is the situation in the borders or on the borders and also analyzing and making recommendations for the policymakers. And, you know, I believe that there's a role for the universities, for religious organizations, for trade unions, for NGOs and civil society, all to be actively engaged in this process.
Now, you've spoken about Venezuela rejecting thus far the provisional measures issued by the court, the orders of the court. One may ask, is whenever the decision is handed down in the substantive matter, would it be binding on Venezuela? And what are the implications of not adhering to such a ruling? And what could be done if should they reject that ruling at the level of the United Nations?
Well, that's where I think that the issue of compliance becomes an important one, because I don't think that, well, let's put it the other way, I think that the court of public opinion, international public opinion, will then step in, because Venezuela is claiming that it's not part of, it doesn't accept the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. And I don't think that there's any form of enforcement at least at this stage, by the United Nations. But I think that we'll have to ensure that places like organizations like the United Nations, the Security Council, are consistently engaged in this process, so that at the end of at the adjudication stage, they can pronounce on Venezuela's need to accept the journey and the verdict, or wherever the verdict goes, or the judgment. But I think that we need to, at this stage, also prepare for that by ensuring that our allies are up to date and consistently in support, unequivocally in support, including CARICOM, of the need to ensure that we continue to have that level of support from all our neighbors, our friends and allies.
What are some of the countries that are backing Guyana, the major countries and organizations that are backing Guyana in this controversy?
Well, I think there's widespread international support, both at the bilateral and multilateral levels. I mean, you've seen the Commonwealth, the United Nations, CELAC, which I think is an organization that we need to embrace a little bit more robustly. The OAS, countries of Latin America, Africa. But I still think that there's a little bit of a gap in relation to, you know, the updating of our positions, because in our talks or when we address some of the issues, especially in the region, we hear the same question about why not negotiating. When that's gone long. You know, when we have years of that, and because they haven't been such they don't have a total understanding of the issue, then we get that kind of question. So what we need to do as a country is ensure that takes place. Send our ambassadors, send our special envoys into those capitals and ensure that our position, both historically and currently, is clear. And this is why our little group is attempting to contribute to this effort on our own. But you hear and you see the gaps in understanding, and that's what we need to fill.
Now, with Venezuela planned election for today, and even prior to that, there are concerns by regular citizens about the issue of migration and Venezuelan migrants being here. What's your perspective on that? And how could Guyanese navigate this controversy?
Well, in this changing regional and global environment, I think we must have a migration management system. I've heard during last week a member of the government hierarchy saying that there are 100,000 Venezuelans in Guyana. We used to hear figures like 20,000, 30,000 and so on. Which means, to my mind, that there's no structured registration arrangement. Now, I believe in the first place we must have that in place, and I see that there are perhaps some templates that we could adjust or tweak. I'm sure the International Office of Migration and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR and IOM, I'm sure that they have some structures that we can tweak or we can borrow to ensure that this migrant registration, this migrant management system unfolds very quickly. Because we need to know of numbers and we need to see where they are. I mean, undoubtedly they make contributions. I mean, you know, I call it anecdotal evidence, but I see them all over. Some of them actively engaged in work and, you know, unskilled and skilled labor in some areas. And maybe we should look to those to see what it is that they bring. Register them and see whether their skills, how they can contribute to an economy that, as far as is known, needs skills, needs labor. There's a labor shortage. So, but I think there must be this registration, this structure.
What's the importance of the structure? Are you concerned that there may be, as we would say, sleeper agents among those who are coming?
But you know, there's the Trojan horse possibility, you know. But I believe that such a system would assist us in ensuring that we can do proper investigation and scrutiny of that type. And so for us as a country, I think we need to ensure once again that, yeah, the humanitarian part of it is important. You know, they're fleeing economic crises and political persecution in some cases, and that we welcome those, but we must welcome them in a structure, you know, prepared to look at forms of education and skills that they bring, what kind of support they can lend to a system that would need labor, but also to attempt to fine-tune our positions in relation to potential sleepers or forward agents, as they call them sometimes.
Have you gone, I've asked you just now about citizens, how should citizens navigate this? But before you get to that, have you gone to border communities and engaged the residents there? And what are their primary concerns on the ground, and what was your advice to them?
Well, we haven't gone to many. I mean, we've spoken, as I said, we've gone to areas first in Georgetown, Linden, New Amsterdam, Tain, and Lethem, but we haven't gone to the Region 1.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, we are with Bartica in Region 7 to have a program where interactive engagement, where we can hear some of their concerns, especially, you know, in relation to the elections and its outcome. But I think that there's where there's a gap, where we need to constantly update the indigenous community, and they must be part of this all-of-country approach to ensure national unity is maintained in terms of, you know, analyzing where the problems are, assessing ways forward, and so forth. But I think that too is part of the gap, because without sufficient information, there are misconceptions, you know, which can lead to, you know, conjecture, analysis that is not necessarily beneficial to the nation. And so I think we need to have more of those outreaches.
What are some of the common misconceptions with regards to the controversy that you've heard?
Yeah, I've heard that one, that we operated in bad faith, which is a myth. We try to put that to rest. And one of the interesting ones is that we should continue to negotiate, while we have to tell all the people that, you know, we did that for such a long period, and that at the end of the day, it's now being juridically settled. So those are some of the constant kinds of questions and comments we get.
And with regards to citizens, Citizens are obviously concerned when you travel in and out of Guyana. Guyanese asked about this controversy, the planned elections, the incursions, the attacks on military men. What would be your primary advice to Guyanese and how they could help spread the message and ensure we safeguard our sovereignty and territorial integrity?
Well, in every step of the way, at every step of the way, I think Guyanese, both here and abroad, must focus on the region, on the national unity element. That this is our country. We have had, years of independence. We've had levels of aggression and maybe intimidation, and that we must continue to see our position that the 1899 Arbitral Award provides for the borders as they've been established, and that at the end of the day, we cannot have any fractures in the approach, that we must, we must comply with Venezuela must comply with the outcomes of the court, and that all must be engaged in this effort to sensitize it. Some may be able to talk to the congressmen in the U.S. or congress people. In other countries, they may be able to talk to governments and NGOs to ensure that our position is always on the board.
Dr. Kirton, you've spoken earlier about although the planned election in Venezuela, which was set for today, will not necessarily, according to government, there's not an indication that the election will be held in any part of our territory, but you mentioned that there could be implications, implications, but say not challenges, I'm looking for the right word, but let's say implications for even just the thought of them saying they held an election here. What could be done by the government to kind of address that? And I want to point you to, for example, our booming oil and gas industry. Recently we saw the incursion into the Stabroek block, our exclusive economic zone. Countries might be looking on, investors might be looking on and say, hey, look, well, thankfully we have ExxonMobil and all its venturers and partners here operating, and we've had some additional auctioning of the other blocks within our exclusive economic zone. But what could be done to reassure investors and other multilateral partners and organizations that there's no infringement in a sense, while there's a threat, it's just a threat at the moment, and we'll continue to safeguard our sovereignty and territorial integrity. I know I was a bit,
I think we have to continue to deal with our partners. We have to ensure that, as they're saying, and they have our back.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to look first, I call the concentric circles of international relations. In the first instance, let our neighbors know. Mm-hmm. Including, well, I look at Brazil as a major counterweight to any aggression. I think we should have a more robust relationship with them. I think CARICOM has to be continuously engaged to ensure there's no fracture, no split in the support. At the international level now, we talk about the United States and the Western world. Continuing. The United States has indicated that should there be any incursion, there could be consequences. Yes. I'm just trying to remember that, not the exact quote.
It would be a bad day for Venezuela. Yeah, according to the U.S. Secretary.
Yeah, I mean, we have to look at that too in the context of, the investment of Exxon and its partners in the oil and gas sector. We have to look to other capitals. I think we have to look more importantly at Africa. We have to ensure that we get the support, unequivocal support of the Asian states, India, and even let China understand that, this is a question of territorial integrity and sovereignty of our nation. So we have, I think, the international community, to convince the investors, I think there may be a little bit of, not a little bit, some concern because Venezuela is a bit unpredictable in its approach. Today's elections may very well, be only maybe a kind of a ceremonial occasion, but it, to my mind, looks as if that was an effort by President Maduro to keep this issue of their claim on Essequibo as a national front burner issue. So that we have to be, I think, also cautious about, and to look at how that impacts potential investment. I think so far the government has indicated, just yesterday I saw some notice, Vice President Jack Liu indicated that our allies are on board, and that the Guyanese must not be too scared, so to speak.
No need to panic.
No need to panic. But I think that, and that's perhaps right. But at the same time, we have to have some structures, some analysis being done, and then a set of options, what ifs, the what ifs, and how you deal with the what ifs. They could be, and I don't want to speculate, but suppose there is a civilian incursion of larger numbers. Right? What after the election? What should be the position? That has to be analyzed, and see where that situation leads us. What if there's some form of military movement? Do we activate? Well, my view, once again, thinking some people might say outside the box, is that we should have already had some kind of military mission, right? Hemispheric, a deterrence mission, because our capacity militarily is known, but I believe that we could have a broadened regional security system, the RSS, to include Trinidad and Jamaica, which have substantial military forces, along with a broadened hemispheric grouping, the United States, Brazil, maybe some others, under the aegis of the United Nations. I saw it done, here, in the region, a humanitarian military mission in Haiti, in which Brazil had an important part, in MINUSTA it was. Right? And so that type of engagement should be considered. And once again, I think that's a need that we have as a nation, to look to see what are some of the options that we have for these potentially different types of outcomes.
Oh, just for clarity, are you saying the mission, the body of military grouping should have already been on the ground, or we should have had them on standby?
Well, that should have been one of our first consideration. Look to see whether or not it is, to preempt any kind of approach, or on standby somewhere for assistance to our military forces. But I think that will have to kind of be the minds of the military and geostrategic experts will have to look at that.
But some might want to see with regards to that might be sending the wrong message if you have such a broad body of blended military men on the ground, on our borders. It might send a bad signal to Venezuela. What would be your response to that?
Well, I would say that one recognizes the inability or the lack of military strength on our side. And the need, while we need to defend in some ways, in the first instance, our country by upgrading the assets of our military, I think that we'll have to look, if that should happen, we have to look for support. And I believe the best thing to start with is at the hemisphere. And so I don't know if it'd be sending a bad signal, but at least preparing Guyana for we don't want to alarm people.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's that an important component of the whole exercise.
Dr. Kirton, as we prepare to wrap up, what would be some of your primary messages, your closing remarks to those listening, to government, to the citizens of Guyana, and also to the citizens of Venezuela, because we want our message to hit home to them as well, but countries are far and wide?
Well, to the government of Venezuela, I think we need to say to them and to repeat that Essequibo is Guyana's. There's never been any occupation, any ownership by Spain, which was the mother country or the colonial ruler of Venezuela. There's never been any Venezuelan occupation. As a matter of fact, if you look at Venezuela, as my colleagues say, if you look at Venezuela and look at Essequibo, there's never been any village or anything that has a name that is Spanish. You know, and so that there's never any Venezuelan occupation or part of it. So the ownership, it can't be. So we got to let Venezuela know that those boundaries, again, reiterate to them that those boundaries were set, and that there's a spurious claim, and that's the level of the International Court of Justice, and any place they want to go, or the only place that could settle the claim is at that judicial level, and it's at the ICJ. To the people of Guyana, I would say that we must all continue to look at this and speak with one voice, and that voice must be support for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of our country. And for the people internationally, I think the message must be the correctness of our position, and that those countries, especially those in our hemisphere, I mean, we have to look at South America in the first place, we have to look at the rest of Latin America, our Caribbean brothers and sisters, and the US, and all of those states, that we have never had any aggressive action taken by Guyana in relation to water claims. We've gone through periods of negotiation and discourse and dialogue, and we are correct in our view that Essequibo is Guyana's.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kirton. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Sources, but permit us to wish Guyana happy independence, 59 years of independence.
Oh, yes, yes.
It's been a long time. We've made some progress, so we have a lot more work to do.
Yeah.
And we'll maintain at the level of the ICJ and everywhere we go that Essequibo belongs to us, Guyana. Stay well.